This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market stocks edged up just slightly today. That's after a painful start to the week. Investors, of course, are still cautious on fears that cash-strapped Chinese developer Evergrande's debt crisis would affect the broader economy. Now, non-Asian bourses saw modest gains today. South Africa's JSE was firmer, set to recover from Monday's sell-off, which, of course, saw the all-share fall to its weakest level since January. In Egypt, the EGX 30 fell almost 2% on the day. That's amid local sell-offs and Arab and foreign purchases. Now, also coming up on the show today, we catch up with one of the participants in MTN Uganda's mobile stock trading platform. The UN General Assembly kicks off with climate change and a global pandemic high on the agenda. And South Africa's digital economy gains traction amid strict COVID-19 regulations. Well, we start off today's show in Uganda. The country's securities exchange, in partnership with mobile telecom operator MTN Uganda, recently launched a digital platform that will enable investors to open accounts and trade on the stock exchange using their mobile phones. Now, the digital platform is intended to make it easier for more people to invest in the stock market. Here's CGTN's Michael Baleke with more.
The electronic solution is meant to streamline the process for investors to open accounts, buy and sell shares, or make transfers on the stock market. The digital platform is expected to attract and grow investor numbers from the current 38,000.
We think that this is a game changer, that over probably the next couple of months, we probably should be in hundreds of thousands of investors because we've made it easier for any Ugandan to open an account on the exchange and not go through the laborious process of dealing with paperwork.
Previously, people intending to invest on the stock exchange would see a stock broker in person and manually fill in the paperwork. The new digital platform is expected to make the process much easier, safer, and faster. Both smartphone and non-smartphone users will have access to the mobile money platform.
They are now saying utilize MTN Momo to participate in opening an account which allows you to buy shares. For today, phase 1. Phase 2 allows you to sell and even send money to the brokers. This is what opportunity is about. This is what including people, okay, in new forms of wealth creation is about.
MTN Uganda has the largest subscriber base of up to 15 million people. The telecom company also offers mobile financial services. On average, the Uganda Securities Exchange opens between 2,000 and 2,500 new accounts every year. Through research, they found out the numbers have remained low because the process has not been convenient. But with the new electronic platform, the net will be cast wide across the country to capture new investors in places with access to mobile networks. MTN Uganda is also preparing to list 20% of its shares on Uganda's stock exchange, an opportunity for Ugandans to own a part of the South African-owned mobile telecom company.
Listing is a requirement and part of the guidelines, if you'd want to call it that, provided by the government of Uganda to MTN as part of its 12-year commitment, or what we call the license. So the key date there is June 2022, the time by which we should have done that.
An initial public offering was one of the conditions for the renewal of the firm's telecom operator's license last year. Investors will be keenly watching MTN's IPO, which is expected to be the biggest in Uganda's history and a major boost to the country's stock market. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, let's now discuss this new platform further with Joram Ongura. He is the CEO of SBG Securities in Uganda. Great to have you on the show with us today, Mr. Ongura. Now, certainly this new platform is a series of firsts, especially for Uganda. It will be the country's first mobile phone-based stock trading platform. And it's also a first in terms of a partnership between a telecom operator and, of course, a stock exchange. What makes this platform so significant, and how does it compare to other stock trading apps that are already quite popular in this side of the world?
Thank you. Good evening, viewers. Good afternoon or good morning. Yes, if I could just address that, I mean, the platform economy has been on the rise, and this has been powered by the shift from an industry economics perspective to an infrastructure as well as a behavioral experience for customers. So this is quite not new for the stock market, because ideally all this is evolving together, whatever the dynamics we've seen changing across the spectrum. So as the partnership with the telcos, we've seen as this has greatly improved on some of on activity, in that we've seen a number of Ugandans there, find eventually, accessing through their phones, can actually register and apply to open up the account on the Uganda Securities Exchange, which of course, helps us deliver on the whole financial inclusion, where you're having more Ugandans participating in the market. So also the processes of you actually going through this is quite unique in the region. I must say it's the first of its kind, where you actually have an investor, a local investor, actually, dial in a special, the usual dial in a special number, which number ideally is interlinked to the securities depository account. So you find that as an investor, you're only required to just provide your national identification number, which of course is validated against the telecom KYC, and eventually an account is set up for you at the Uganda Securities Exchange. Thank you.
Well, let's delve a bit further into what this app is all about, because the Uganda Stock Exchange has just about 38,000 investors. It trades just about 17 stocks. So realistically, it's not the most liquid exchange on the continent. Now, its equity market, we know, has struggled with liquidity, especially since the pandemic. So how do you expect this app to impact investor interest? Do you think there'll be investor interest in trading equities in the Ugandan market? And certainly, how do you think it'll impact activity going forward?
All right, thank you. Yes, if I would say that on a lighter note, but also as a positive for us is that from the time when this this activation was launched, we've seen significant numbers in terms of a number of Ugandans open up accounts. I could just comment for SBG Securities, we've seen our numbers really go by about 30-40% in less than a week. So that is quite positive, and this should be ideally help us deliver on the awareness about the capital markets, which we've seen has been a hindrance in terms of activity, hence coming back to the issue of liquidity. So the more we see more Ugandans participating in some of the concerns of liquidity, some of this could be addressed, because we've seen 17 count stocks are listed, most of those of which are cross-listed. But again, for just the local listed entities, we've not seen so much activity. And we've noticed that the activity in our market is mostly dominated by international investors. So this is a whole new change that will, of course, will improve on the local activity. Thank you.
And let's delve further into how, because as an investment firm in Uganda, give us more insight into how you plan to use this app also to attract more Ugandans, to get them to embrace stock trading and, of course, other non-traditional investments in Uganda.
I must say that, being part of a group that has, that has been in existence for more than 100 years with experience and, and the appreciation of financial products, we are able to actually structure in new products, but again, create products that ideally could suit the retail investor. Of course, hence delivery on the participation. Sorry about that. But away from that, also, we are currently going through a licensing regime where we hope eventually to bring a couple of new markets or new products into the market, but it's always advantageous when you have, a large pool of customers already signed into the market. So this ideally should help us deliver and achieve our objective. Thank you.
Well, we'll certainly be watching that closely. Many thanks, Mr. Ongura, for your insights there. That, of course, is Joram Ongura, CEO of SBG Securities in Uganda. And moving on now, Egypt and Libya have inked 14 memorandum of understandings and 6 agreements in multiple fields. According to the agreement, Egyptian companies will now lead the reconstruction process in Libya, which of course has been marred by violence and infighting in the last decade. From Cairo, here's Yasser Hakim with the details.
It's a milestone in relations between the two North African neighbors that could go a long way in helping rebuild the war-stricken Libyan state. Authorities in Tripoli say the deals signed in Cairo amount to about $19 billion and will be financed by the Libyan Central Bank.
We all know that Libya has a completely damaged infrastructure, education and health systems, and others since the NATO attacks in 2011. And it is now a remnant of a state that requires rebuilding. We will need the Egyptian expertise and labor, especially now that Egypt has revolutionized its construction and infrastructure sectors and the economy in general.
The 20 agreements cover a wide range of projects, building power stations, highways, housing, infrastructure, as well as projects in oil and gas, renewable energy, aviation, agriculture, and more. All this will be conducted by Egyptian companies.
There are now many huge companies in Egypt that have experience in developing projects in all fields. They have been in the forefront of our successful developmental process and will be transferring their experience to establish projects that will achieve all the hopes and ambitions of the Libyan people soon.
Egypt would also benefit from these deals by creating investment opportunities for its companies, more jobs for Egyptian workers in Libya, and a new revenue stream. However, some experts warn it could be a bumpy road ahead.
These agreements are hinging on the security situation in Libya. The agreements remain only pen on paper. As long as Libya is not stable and secure, as long as the political process is not going on the right track to hold elections in December, to disarm militias and deport mercenaries, I fear if this is not achieved, then the agreements will not become a reality on the ground.
But the Libyan interim prime minister had a message of support to all those involved in the agreement.
We demand the ministers in both governments and the companies to work hard to actualize the MOUs and contracts signed here into a reality in the next few weeks, and we will not hesitate as Libyan people, myself personally, and the Egyptian Prime Minister in providing all necessary support to make your mission a success.
And in a sign of intent, meetings in the Egyptian capital saw the relaunch of the Joint Egyptian-Libyan Higher Committee after a 12-year suspension. It will be monitoring the progress of these projects and tackle any obstacles that stand in the way. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now let's take a look at our other corporate headlines today. Vodacom Group has signed a deal that could see it buy an additional 10.9% stake in Safaricom Telecoms Ethiopia at a cost of $1.74 billion in the coming years. Now the deal, if completed, will raise Vodacom's interest in the newly formed telco to 17.1%. The South African-based multinational currently owns a 6.2% stake in the Ethiopian firm. And a subscription video on-demand service, Netflix, has begun offering a free mobile plan with about 1/4 of its TV shows and movies in Kenya. The free plan is available on Android mobile phones and will not have any ads. Now, it features Netflix movies and TV shows. Netflix hopes the free plan will lead to users signing up for a paid option with more content. Meanwhile, Kenya's Energy Ministry has now offered to arbitrate talks between Kenya Power and the Kenya Electrical Trades and Allied Workers Union in order to avert a strike which was planned for next month. Energy Secretary Charles Keter held talks with the union officials and would later invite the company's board of directors to try to resolve the impasse. Now, union officials had suspended the strike notice planned for October for month-long talks in order to find solutions. And South Africa's Competition Tribunal has approved the takeover of Grand Parade Investments, Burger King in South Africa, by an international private equity fund. The Competition Commission had prohibited the proposed takeover in June, objecting to various unmet conditions. Well, Grand Parade now says a new set of conditions are expected to be met within 5 years. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are heading into a short break now. Here's a look at what's still to come. Nigeria's real estate sector records the highest growth since 2014. And South Africa's wine industry takes a knock due to alcohol bans.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Well, let's head over to Egypt now, whose capital has been suffering from an acute parking crisis that has been blamed on its congested streets and a rapid increase in vehicles. Now, to further compound the problem, many contractors have over the past few decades not adhered to parking space regulations. But as CGTN's Yasser Akim reports, a company has come up with an innovative parking solution, which it says could help solve the problem for good.
Congested streets, overcrowded parking lots, and it's a nightmare for motorists, especially in Egypt's overpopulated capital, Cairo. It's a growing problem that the government is trying to solve long-term by developing the public transport system and building new cities to relieve the pressure. But in the short term, it's a huge headache. The government had to resort to building underground garages, which were very costly, until this innovative idea was introduced by a private sector company here in Egypt for the first time. And it is called the vertical outdoor parking area. This electric mechanism, that's been imported by a smart parking company, was first installed inside a small building constructed for this purpose at Roxy Garage in eastern Cairo.
With this system, we are able to increase the number of cars parked in the same area. We started at Roxy Parking, where we have doubled the number of cars than in a normal garage. But that was an expensive project that cost more with the building and machinery. Here, we are using smart solution at less cost, and we are able to achieve our target.
The updated smart solution has been put on trial at Heliopolis Sporting Club in Cairo. It's easy to operate by mechanically moving the car up and down or sideways. The vehicle can be recalled in less than 1 minute from its parking spot.
It's a very good idea that will solve the parking problem in the club, and especially when it is installed in the whole area. It will double the number of car space here. It will also protect the car from congestion and skirmishes. It is safer and will avoid human errors associated with parking.
The vertical garage can be installed as high as 6 levels. The importer has now built it locally with another partner.
The risk was in locally producing the whole system and safety factor to be fully automated without errors or problems. This was a big challenge. We as the mechanical engineering team took over the mission and created the system in only 4 weeks and installed it here in 5 days.
The system can also be installed at private villas or housing complexes, and that's why the company is planning to expand to other cities to help solve the parking crisis around the country for good. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And heading to Tunisia now, the country's housing market is slowly recovering after a pandemic-induced slowdown that was witnessed in the better part of last year. Now, according to the country's statistics agency, the real estate price index edged up 15.4% in the second quarter of 2021, and that's compared to the same period last year. Well, CGTN's Annette Shaushi brings us up to speed with the latest data.
Tunisia's real estate price index edged up due to the increase by 23.7% in house prices compared to an average of 5.1% in 2015-2020. The North African state recorded a rise in building land prices, which jumped 15.9% compared to the average of 5.7% witnessed in the 2015-2020 period. Apartments prices also rose as growth increased by 11.6%.
The resumption of activity was slowed down by the second wave of the pandemic. Things will get better as the health situation improves. Some property development projects lasted much longer than expected. This situation impacted the cost of housing and the price index. Many companies are suffering from this prolonged crisis.
Despite the slight improvement recorded in the housing sector, many Tunisians say they cannot own a house or an apartment due to their high costs.
Tunisians, especially young adults, cannot own a house. The salaries are too low while the prices are very high. Prices have skyrocketed in recent years. I've given up on the idea of buying an apartment in Tunis.
Our purchasing power is too low while the cost of living is high. Even a couple with 2 salaries cannot afford to buy a house. Banks are rejecting loan requests because people cannot pay back the expensive loans.
The Director General of Housing at the Ministry of Equipment, Housing and Infrastructure agrees that the real estate market is facing many challenges which hamper its development.
State-owned construction companies and private property developers are facing the problem of land scarcity, high land costs and development, as well as rising inflation in the prices of construction materials over the past decade. The state is trying to find solutions by offering affordable houses for the middle and poor classes, but meeting this goal is challenging.
According to the National Institute of Statistics, the real estate price index went up by 6.8% due to the rise by 7.8% in house prices, 6.7% in building land prices, and 6.6% in flat prices compared to the first quarter of 2021. The INS report also showed that the volume of real estate transactions dropped by 11.1% in the second quarter of 2021 compared to the first quarter of the same year. However, experts assert that the steady recovery of the property sector will continue after the slowdown experienced since 2020. Adel Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And moving on now, the real estate sector in Nigeria has seen increased investment interest. Data from the country's Bureau of Statistics revealed the sector recorded its highest growth since 2014. Now, this is despite the slowdown in the economy that crippled consumer earnings and purchasing power. Yes, CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam with more.
Nigeria's property market continues to thrive, defying the nation's economic turmoil. The industry recorded a 3.85% growth in the second quarter of 2021, posting a 6-year record high. With the increasing uncertainties in other sectors, including oil and gas, more investors are finding real estate a viable investment option.
The oil and gas, which everybody has been doing, is no more doing well again. So a good number of people are now going to the real estate sector because of its benefits. The value for housing does not depreciate. The whole success story can be attributed to the activity of the private sector in Nigeria. And I can tell you, the private sector can do more if there's enabling environment.
Experts say that the growth in the real estate sector is capable of boosting the nation's GDP.
It is very significant because once you record a growth in a particular sector of the economy, it adds up to the GDP. And when it adds up to the GDP, it creates employment. A lot of people are employed right now, people who are, who are selling these materials, building materials, people who are building them. So you see more and more civil engineers and more builders making money right now.
Businesses in various sectors across Nigeria have hit rock bottom since the COVID-induced economic crisis. But the real estate sector continues to stand the test of time. Individual and institutional investors raising and deploying capital into the sector. But that doesn't address major issues like the housing deficit problem.
But the only challenge we are having is that the improvement we just recorded has not addressed the affordability of those houses. The success story is reflected at the higher hierarchy of the housing industry.
Industry players want government to ramp up efforts to sustain the growth and gains. They are recommending interventions like housing subsidies, a working mortgage system, improved land policies, and tackling insecurity issues. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, let's go to South Africa now, where a series of alcohol bans through the country during the COVID-19 lockdown cost wine producers dearly. While government argues this was done to keep trauma units clear in order to focus on those ill with the virus, it has crippled the livelihoods of many in the industry. Well, wineries have had to dramatically cut costs, production and staff. Some are now looking to the African continent to stay in operation. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with more on their story.
Business was booming for South African wine producer Larrick Mal before the COVID-19 pandemic.
There are not many successful black-owned brands in South Africa, and Larrick Mal, I would say, we're one of the top 3, producing or bottling close to 500,000-600,000 liters a year. That's what we're currently doing. Our export ratio is 60%, local 40%, and we've managed to enter many countries.
Several booze bans since March last year nearly wiped out production, crippled sales, and halted exports to key markets like China.
I think when COVID started initially in the beginning, the restriction on alcohol hit a lot of us producers hard, and quite a few of us, it was touch and go if we were going to survive or if we were not going to survive.
A slow recovery threatens to undo decades of hard work for the bottle recycler turned producer. Its Premier and Lerato labels have been widely carried by retail giant ShopRite for several years.
It's very challenging to try and get listings with retailers, but when you do get a listing with a retailer, it takes your business to a different level because it somehow also gives you that sense of sustainability. We struggled quite a bit, especially in the sense of us trying to find our own market and trying to open our own doors.
The challenges in the wine industry for black people is perception. So because we are not from the industry or have not built up a name, it's perceived that the brands are not strong enough or good enough. So having crawled into ShopRite and then given the opportunity, our growth in ShopRite is in excess of 25 to 30% per annum.
The retailer's reach in other African markets helped the brand expand north of South Africa's borders to 16 other countries.
We interact a lot with our own African counterparts, with Nigerians and with Ghanaians and with Mozambicans. So for us, it was a no-brainer to stick to the African market. The European will come, but Africa is our first primary focus, and then obviously the Asian market.
Alcohol sales in the home market remain subdued as South Africa battles to contain rising COVID-19 infections. Laurik Mal is now looking to the continent to grow its business. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now, but still coming up on the show. The UN General Assembly kicks off with climate change, a global pandemic high on the agenda. And British policymakers look at ways to help major energy suppliers survive recent cost hikes.
This has taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
No one again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
See, business in Africa is high risk.
After After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Welcome back. And now to international news. The 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly has just opened. Secretary General Antonio Guterres delivered a speech warning about the daunting issues the world is facing.
The world must wake up. We are on the edge of an abyss and moving in the wrong direction. Our world has never been more threatened or more divided. We face the greatest cascade of crises in our lifetimes. The COVID-19 pandemic has supersized the glaring inequalities. The climate crisis is pummeling the planet. Upheaval from Afghanistan to Ethiopia to Yemen and beyond has thwarted peace. A surge of mistrust and misinformation is polarizing people and paralyzing societies. Human rights are under fire, and science is under assault. And the economic lifelines for the most vulnerable are coming too little and too late, if they come at all. Solidarity is missing in action just when we need it most.
Well, let's now get the latest on that meeting. We're joined by John Terrett. He is in New York. Great to have you with us on the show today, John. Now, as expected, redefining that post-pandemic global outlook and fighting global climate change, those were some of the two hot topics this year. Guterres struck quite a somber note there. Give us an update on today's meeting so far.
Yes, he did. You know, he really did, and in many ways, I think the star of the show today was Antonio Guterres, who is the Secretary General. I mean, that was the most remarkable speech. I've been talking to people here all morning, and we think it's probably the most powerful speech by a Secretary General, who always opens up the first day of the general debate. We think it's probably the most powerful speech we've ever heard. I mean, if I just turn to my page where I made a note of this, I mean, this is the opening thing he said. So Antonio Guterres, the first thing out of his mouth was, I'm here to sound an alarm. The world must wake up. We're on the edge of an abyss. And it went on from there. I mean, quite remarkable. He outlined what he called 6 grand canyons that the world has to cross in order to make things better. And they include things like peace and climate change and the divide between rich and poor and gender and the digital divide and the generational divide. It was really, really gripping stuff. And so once we got past that, we then heard from Jair Bolsonaro, who is the Brazilian president. And what's interesting about him is that he's here probably officially breaking UN rules because he says that he hasn't been vaccinated. And part of the reason for allowing so many heads of state and leading diplomats and ambassadors into the building at all is on the honor system. They say they've been vaccinated or they say they haven't. If they haven't, they're not supposed to come. But he came anyway and delivered the speech on behalf of his country. And then we got to Joe Biden. It was a 33-minute long speech. It was all about America coming back. He said America will continue to lead with the world's problems, but we won't do it alone. And there's the clue to the tone of this. It was very, very inclusive. It was very different to Donald Trump, and that was one of the things I think that he had to do. He called the world as being at an inflection point at the moment regarding COVID-19 with millions of deaths. He pointed to the COVID summit, which was his idea, that is coming up here on Wednesday. He called that very exciting. He talked about the use of US force around the world as an absolute last resort. He talked about NATO as being sacred, particularly Article 5, where all the NATO members clubbed together should one be attacked. And one of the big headlines was, America is not interested in creating another Cold War. He said we will work with any nation in order to avoid that. And for Africa, I heard only one mention, and that was Ethiopia in the context of rape used as a weapon. And as you know, I was on the program from Africa, from here, last week when the United Nations deferred sanctions on the Ethiopian government because of that and many other issues involving that conflict in the Tigray region. So that was really the highlight from the Secretary General and also from President Biden.
Well, I just want to hone in on the whole debate around global vaccination and, of course, vaccine access going forward, because especially for Africa, that is a topic of interest. How did we hear leaders approaching that topic specifically?
Well, you're absolutely right to cite it as a key issue for Africa because, as you know, the problem is that here in the United States, we are awash with the stuff. We've got so much vaccine, we don't know what to do with it. And indeed, one of the things that President Biden highlighted in his speech was the fact that the U.S. is now exporting vaccine overseas to countries that desperately need it. And of course, he cited this COVID debate, which is going to happen tomorrow, Wednesday, that was his idea. It would be partly virtual and partly in person. But he said that that was a very exciting opportunity to move forward, to try and work out how this thing happened and to look at all the various variants that there are, including Delta and others that are currently around the world. And I think that, you know, the whole COVID-19 debate is something which is one of the absolute key issues here at the UN General Assembly this year. And I think it's worth just reminding ourselves that Jair Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, did speak this morning, and he says that he's not vaccinated. And the reason that's relevant is because he's supposed to be vaccinated to come here and speak. And he got in there. But if he tries to go to a New York restaurant or a New York gym, for example, he will be turned away unless he has written proof of a vaccination. So this whole issue of vaccine inequality is something that I think is going to be discussed. And one more point on this issue. The president of the UN General Assembly this year is the foreign minister from the Maldives, and it is one of his key issues, and he wants to elaborate on this issue of vaccine inequality, either in a special event that is an addition to the General Assembly, either sometime this year or early in 2022.
Now, you already went into this earlier. You mentioned how Biden made some statements around being inclusive and not looking for a Cold War. And we're just waiting for President Xi Jinping, who will be speaking in a few minutes or hours. We're not quite sure. What are the expectations from his speech? And certainly, how are we seeing leaders approaching other geopolitical issues at this event?
Well, let me tell you, the nub of this starts again with the Secretary General, who in that speech that I was referring to just now, talked about all the things that he wants to do, some of which I highlighted, all of which are based around, I mean, his dire prediction is based around the issue of COVID and climate change and human rights and democracy and conflict and that sort of thing. And he went on to say, all of what I'd like to see happen to put this right is impossible while the world's two largest economies are at odds with each other. And that was a direct reference, of course, to Washington and to Beijing, essentially bashing heads together and saying, come on, you two have got to get along. You know you need each other, particularly when it comes to climate change. So you've got to stop this bickering that is going on and this nastiness which is going on between the two sides when it comes to issues like, companies being delisted at the stock exchange, Americans not allowed to invest in Chinese companies overseas, all of that kind of stuff. Now, as for Xi Jinping, well, I'll tell you a little secret. He was supposed to speak next Saturday, the 25th. In the end, they changed it very late last night. It was a last-minute change as far as I can tell. The speech is going to be recorded. It has been recorded because it's very early in the morning in China now. It will be a virtual appearance by President Xi. And he's going to push all the buttons that he normally pushes. For example, talking up multilateralism and centrality here at the United Nations. In other words, his vision of a shared future for mankind that is based around multilateralism, respect for sovereignty, and respect for the Charter of the United Nations. And it's a very interesting year for China. This is the 50th anniversary of China ascending to its rightful place in the UN and the Security Council. Of course, it's very active here. You see the Chinese around here a lot, and that at a time when the Americans have kind of distanced themselves a little bit from the UN, both financially and physically, certainly since 9/11. I think that he's also going to touch on the AUKUS outrage as well, which has really outraged China, that deal between Britain and America and Australia, where Australia gets nuclear submarines. China's very upset about that. And of course, he will be speaking, President Xi will be speaking at a time when Afghanistan is finding its feet after the US chaotic pullout and the Taliban taking over. And of course, there are only two major embassies left in Kabul now. One is Russia, and the other one is China. And I think probably President Xi will try to set out his stall on the future for Afghanistan as well, on top of all the key issues that we've mentioned: COVID, climate change, and respect for the individual.
Right. Well, many thanks for those insights, John. Of course, we'll be following your updates closely as the day goes on. That is John Terrett joining us there in New York. Now, on the sidelines of the ongoing United Nations General Assembly was the ministerial event where government and civil society galvanized the international community's stance on the state of Afghanistan. The global representatives shared views on the need to continue supporting the Afghan people to ensure the international community builds upon the gains made in the nation over the past decade.
At the outset, I would like to reiterate that the state of Qatar is in full solidarity with the people of Afghanistan and supports their efforts to achieve their legitimate demands for stability, security, peace, and development. We believe that a comprehensive and sustainable peace is key to halt the humanitarian crisis and is also critical for achieving all the sustainable development goals, including SDG 4 on quality education and lifelong learning opportunities for all. This is why we have been deeply engaged in preventive diplomacy in Afghanistan, mediating to support efforts that would achieve national reconciliation while preserving gains made by the Afghan people over the past decades.
The humanitarian human rights situation in Afghanistan is deeply worrying, especially for women and girls. A terrible signal in the transformation of women's affairs ministry into ministry of virtue. I'm confident today's discussion will provide food for thought on what the international community can do in partnership with the United Nations and its agencies to continue supporting women's immediate and medium-term needs and preventing further deterioration on the ground.
Well, let's now shift our focus away from that UNGA meeting to Britain, where British policymakers are now coming up with plans to help major energy suppliers survive recent cost hikes. This came after several companies were squeezed out of the market as they were unable to pass on the cost pressures to consumers under the mandated price caps. And now the remaining ones are asking for financial support as they take on customers from their failed competitors. Here's CGTN's Guy Henderson with more on the story.
The government is continuing to hold a series of crisis meetings after businesses up and down the UK had expressed concern about how they were going to continue to access the natural gas they need to operate their businesses. And one plan that reportedly may emerge from those discussions is as follows. Firstly, the government would allow up to dozens of smaller natural gas providers to collapse. They are only legally allowed to raise bills for consumers up to a certain level, but neither would they have deep enough pockets financially to suck up the extra cost of buying that gas at wholesale in the first place. The government would then provide emergency loans to some of the larger natural gas providers that survive in order to persuade them to take on otherwise unprofitable business in the form of those customers who would come over from those smaller collapsing providers. The knock-on effect there, of course, would be that those businesses would then be able to continue to access that gas and would be able to continue to operate. Separately, we understand the government may also be looking at providing emergency subsidies for some of the big UK fertiliser producers who have stopped production because it's become unprofitable, again on account of those higher natural gas prices. The reason that is so important is that a byproduct of fertiliser production is carbon dioxide, which itself is an essential product for the production and distribution of many products, but including various food and drink products, as well as steel. Speaking for New York, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson insisted that these problems were temporary.
We've got to try and fix it as fast as we can, make sure that we have the supplies that we want, make sure that we don't allow the companies we rely on to go under. We'll have to do everything we can, but this will get better as the market starts to sort itself out as the world economy gets back on its feet.
But it would mean yet more spending by a government who has already forked out unprecedented amounts of financial support for businesses and individuals through the course of this pandemic. That will leave its mark for years, if not decades. Guy Henderson, CGTN, London.
And on that note, here's a quick look at commodity markets today. Oil prices were up slightly as analysts point to signs of U.S. supply tightening, ending days of losses. Meanwhile, gold prices were pretty flat today. Investors adopted a risk-averse stance, and that's amid caution ahead of a U.S. Fed meeting where a hawkish move by the Fed could diminish gold's appeal going forward. But the precious metal was helped by a weaker dollar today. Meanwhile, platinum prices also soaring as much as 3%, having touched a 10-month low on Monday. On that note, let's take a short break. Still to come. South Africa's digital economy gains traction amid strict COVID-19 regulations.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys. The greatest sights. The greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, South Africa has been a largely cash-dependent society, but the digital economy is growing rapidly since the country was placed on a COVID-19 lockdown about 18 months ago. Now, big retailers are starting to explore automated options, with many now introducing online apps and easy payment methods. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with more.
Safer and more convenient cashless shopping caught on quickly in South Africa's lockdown.
8 out of 10 South Africans have a credit or debit card in their wallet, but only 10 out of 100 small businesses accepted them. And because the behavior changed and people shifted from cash to card, small business had followed. They followed what their customers are requesting and have therefore really begun digitizing their businesses.
The shift catapulted retailers big and small into a digital marketplace. Payment platform Yoco, which took a 94% revenue hit during the hard lockdown, has added new electronic offerings and is processing $2 billion worth of transactions a year.
Within 3 months of COVID, we had launched 2 online products. A payment link product allows you to send a link via WhatsApp or via SMS or email. And then we also launched a payment gateway product, which meant that if you took your business online and created an e-commerce store, you could still use Yoco to accept payments.
Now, any business, whether it's a township vegetable stall or a trendy curbside coffee shop like Maweni's, can be easily digitized.
Yoco has helped my business a lot because they got quite a good platform, good tools that you can use for your business. And for me, I'll say it's safe in that way, in that sense, because you don't have to handle cash and then everything it goes straight and it keeps record, it gives you feedback, all the record.
A business like this would usually run purely on cash, but digital platforms are making it easier to do business.
I think almost everyone now is going cashless. I would say a majority of people, especially in this area that I'm in. Most people are using card, even the foreigners, some tourists, they're using card. So it's very nice for me.
Yoco services around 160,000 small enterprises. It's also venturing into the largely untapped township business, where there's a huge potential for job creation. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Well, before we leave you today, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand gaining ground. That's amid hopes the fallout from Chinese property firm Evergrande's debt debacle might be contained. But analysts say much could change as a batch of local and foreign economic indicators could decide whether investors rush to the safe haven dollar or restore riskier bets going forward. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling continuing to weaken today. That's after hitting its lowest point this year yesterday. It dropped further as importers increased demand for the greenback. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send us your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.